Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Boothalier. Today, I'm joined by Mike Vukonich. Mike was born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota, had a 4-year Division I collegiate career with Harvard, drafted 90th overall by the LA Kings in 1987, followed up by an 8-year pro hockey career. After wrapping up hockey, he was able to transition and build a successful business as a financial advisor, business owner, and real estate investor. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Ken.
Well, let's start off when you were a kid in Duluth. You played for Denfield. Were they the big dogs then? Or was East the big dogs? Who was the guy?
Yeah, I would say at that time, East.
Okay.
East were the big dogs. Denfield, we were on the other side of the tracks. You know, they were good. But in 1986, which was my junior year, we made it to the state tournament, and that was a big thing. I mean, that's a big thing in Minnesota State high school hockey. So, and we did it on the. I'd like to say I had part of it, but really the reason we made it was our goalie Rob Stauber, who was he really got us there. So, fun times. Probably when I look back at my hockey career, that's probably one of the biggest accomplishments. You know, just we finished. What did we do that year? I think we finished third place, but yeah, it was like winning the championship, you know, especially for the city of Duluth. The team hadn't gone in a long time, so.
Yeah, that's awesome. So my freshman year of high school, I actually played in Duluth, and I was at Marshall when they were starting their program with the prep, and even then, East was still the big dogs. I only had a cup of coffee in Duluth, though.
Originally,
one year and done.
Marshall was the private school, and originally they were Duluth Cathedral, but it was good hockey up there. Anywhere in the Iron Range, you had to battle every night.
So why not become a Bulldog, and why go to Harvard?
That's a good question. I think growing up in Minnesota, you really wanted to play at two schools, right? You either played at the University of Minnesota, you wanted to be a Gopher.
Yep.
A lot of the guys down in the cities, that's what they did. Or you wanted to be a Bulldog, right? A lot of my friends, guys I played with, but for me, I actually really wanted to get out of town. I wanted to leave Duluth. And I was a huge Bulldog fan growing up. I mean, right now I'm having, just had a conversation the other day with Mike DeAngelis about taking the trip to Duluth just to watch ASU's playing there at the start of October and going up there to watch the Bulldogs. So I've been a Bulldog fan for many, many, many years, season tickets, but I just needed to get out of town. I needed to get I felt like I needed to get away from just family and just kind of go off and do my own thing. I wanted to go to Minnesota. It came down to either Minnesota or Harvard. I had a lot of options. I was fortunate that I had a lot of options that I took a lot of trips to a lot of good schools and had some good options. But at the end of the day, I ended up at Harvard. Kind of ironic. We'll get into that probably, how we ended up playing them later in the national championship, Minnesota that is. And so, yeah, that's kind of how
Did you really enjoy Boston?
I think
different from Duluth?
Boston was different. I mean, when I walked, it was different from the Midwest, right? Like I really hadn't left the Midwest very much, but I remember getting into Boston. Right now, one of my favorite cities. Like a lot of friends back there. If I could go back to Boston anytime I can, I go. I mean, it's just a great city. There's so much culture. There's the food, the people. It's just a neat place. Sports, everything. But I just remember walking in. Into the bank. I forget the name of the bank at that time, or I had to set up a bank account, and nobody's holding doors for anybody. It's a little different atmosphere, right? Sure. I don't want to say more rude, but just a little,
more metropolitan.
Yeah,
in East Coast,
a little different than Duluth, Minnesota.
So when did you play in the national championship against the Gophers? Was that your senior year also?
That would have been my sophomore year.
Sophomore year,
1989. Yeah.
Dive into that a little bit.
So, yeah, that was interesting. That year, we had a good hockey team. We were fortunate my sophomore year that we had 2 Olympians. Lane McDonald won the Hobie Baker that year, and Alan Bourbeau. They'd both played on the Olympic team the year before. They had decided, instead of turning pro, to come back to college, and that really helped us. I mean, we would not have been where we were without them. So we were good that year. I think we had only lost 3 games. And I think the Final Four that year, it was us, Michigan State, Maine, and Minnesota. And any one of those teams, obviously at that point could win. But the neat thing about it for me, we had we had 3 guys from Minnesota on that team that were actively playing. Myself, Todd Harchie, who was a great player from Minnesota. Scott Farden was another one from the Iron Range. But that national championship was actually in Minnesota at the old Civic Center, clear boards. I don't know if anybody ever had seen that, but the clear boards, you don't get to see that everywhere, right? So we ended up playing Minnesota in the national championship, and I mean, crowd-wise, right? I mean, I don't know what that building fit, probably 18,000 people. I mean, it was 95% Minnesota, 5% us. So game went to overtime. We won. Could have gone either way. I mean, I think they had a couple posts in overtime, and it was just, yeah, that's a special moment. That group of guys, when you think back, like in your ice hockey world, you think back to those teams. That was one team that had just a group of guys that were just spectacular people. Sure. That just, to this day, you could pick up the phone and call any one of them, and they'd take your call, right? So, fond memories.
That's awesome. Fast forward to senior year. You played on a line that was dubbed the Fabulous Baker Boys. So for those of you that, I probably look older than I am, but you're 16 years older than me. I have no idea the reference to Fabulous Baker Boys. I know it was a rom-com musical. How did that come about to where you guys were dubbed with that nickname? And I'm not privy to the musical, but so the best player in each year in college hockey is Hobie Baker, right? Okay. And I don't know. I think they all that year. We had a good line. Like, we were one of the top in the country. My line mates were Teddy Donato. He's now the head coach at Harvard, had a great NHL career. Peter Savaglia, who I think he's top 6 scoring in Harvard history and was just a fabulous player, had a tremendous college or a pro career also. And I was the worst player on that line by far. So but I was, But you led the team. You led the team in scoring.
But you surround yourself with people who are better than you, and then right.
Sure.
I always say that I play better. I'm better when I play with better people. So,
so you were Hobie Baker candidate that year.
We weren't, but
all 3 of you, or
no? Actually, I believe just one of us was Peter Savaglia. Okay. But they all felt like we could have been, but that just doesn't happen, or didn't happen back then, right? It's a little bit different now. So if you're at that time, they weren't going to push multiple players for the Hobie Baker, right? You're going to pick one guy
and ride it.
And I had a good senior year, but those other 2 guys were fabulous players who either one of them, I would say deserved it more than me. So I'm trying to even think who won the Hobie that year in 89. Might have been, or that wasn't 89, that was 91. I don't even remember who won it that year, but.
So the name came from you guys potentially being 3 candidates for it?
I think so.
Gotcha. Just coincidence. Nothing to do. So when I kind of looked into it before the show, it's like Fabulous Baker Boys, and the synopsis of the movie was a rom-com musical with like 3 pretty boys. I'm like, were these guys just crushing it?
By the way, I could be wrong, and I could have been off now for 30 years. I just like to think of it the other way.
There you go. And that would make more sense. Yeah. So after college, obviously, you're drafted by the Kings prior to going into your freshman year?
87, my senior year of high school. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that process like for you? And especially, obviously, with LA being a relatively new team that had been around a little while. Was Gretz already there in 87?
I'm trying to think if Gretz got there in 89, maybe.
Okay.
If that rings a bell. I don't think he was there in 87 yet, but I think I was at home or out on the rink, or who knows what I was doing, right? I didn't go to the draft. You knew you were going to get drafted because people told you were going to get drafted, but a lot of guys got drafted back then. The rounds were longer, right? There were more rounds. So a lot of the Minnesota guys got drafted. So it was a big deal, but it wasn't like I was going to get drafted in the first or second round. So it was just like, okay, and you knew what you were going to do at that time, what your path was, right? Like, obviously you weren't ready to go to the next level. So you knew you were going to go to college, and eventually you'd hope to play in the NHL. And so your path was kind of set, and you knew it would be for a couple of years. So they sent me a jacket. I remember, I still have it. And literally it might fit one of your daughters, by the way. It's that small. I should have brought it, but it's like, and I still have it unworn. And I was like, it looks like it's like a, boy's small,
vintage, like 80s style jacket.
Yeah. The yellow and purple. Right.
Nice.
So yeah,
that's cool. That you
might
still
have to bust that out one time.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So you start your pro career then playing for the Phoenix Roadrunners, at the time, the direct farm team for the Kings here in Phoenix. 3 seasons with the Runners?
91 to 94. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
So my family actually had season tickets for the Roadrunners from 89 to 96. I think 96. Is that when they wrapped up in the I? I think 96,
sometime
97.
A little bit later. And I felt like they came back at some point, and I forget. It's all kind of gray.
Yeah, they came back in the West Coast League, and then et cetera, et cetera. But so we had season tickets in the corner on the glass, right by the Zamboni. So it would have been to the right of the goaltender there. And that's basically where I learned to play hockey. So growing up, I was a far bigger asshole than what a little kid should be playing hockey, because all I got to do was watch
a bunch of
I was sitting there in the corner in net front. I'm like, okay, I'm a defenseman. This is how you take care of net front. You beat the shit out of the guy net front, whether the puck's there or not. And then in the corner, you beat the shit out of the guy there and get the puck or get the puck out. So that's where I developed a lot of my
That's usually where the fight
habits.
started, right in that corner.
Loved it. And that's when all the team staff would go through that corner to get to the bench.
Yep.
And I remember there was a trainer. He was either with San Diego Golds or Kansas City Blades, because they were both black, red, and white, right? The colors.
Yes.
And he would always carry Bazooka bubblegum, and he'd always toss a piece of Bazooka over the glass when they were in town playing. So I was a big Runners fan, obviously. So you played, who was in net? Gaverty was in net when you started
that
off
year
there?
was David Gaverty and Daryl Gilmore.
Gotcha.
If I remember right, were our two goalies.
And Gaverty, I just remember being a little kid because he had the Arizona flag helmet, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. My favorite runner then was Kevin McDonald.
Yeah.
We, at least as the fans, Mad Mac, right? And then the Coliseum was the Madhouse on McDowell.
Yep.
Any good Kevin McDonald stories?
Well, Mac, it's funny. He's now he's been in the construction business. He's doing really well. He lives in California. He reached out to me a couple years ago on LinkedIn, and it was great to hear from him because you lose touch with a lot of guys. But the one thing I remember about Mac, outside of being crazy, he wasn't a big guy.
No,
right?
not at all.
And back then, you probably had 4 or 5 guys they were your tough guys, right? I mean, their job was to fight. But Mac was one thing about him, he was the leader, right? So when I came in 91, he was our captain. And the one thing that I remember about Mac is he had a heart of gold, right? I mean, he was the toughest guy on the ice there was. And he could play ice hockey too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, he was a good player, smart player, but foremost, he was a leader. But he took a lot of us. I think there were 4, 5, 6 of us, new guys, rookies. And he just took us under his wing, Allied Automotive, John McConnell, who I didn't this is where you want to do your car. This is right. So he really took care of us. So as far as Mac goes, when I look back, I just have fond memories of him as being my first captain in pro hockey, who at least acted like he cared about us.
Sure.
Even though we were all trying to do the same thing, right? We're all trying to get to that next level, and it's either you or this guy, but he was there for us, Matt. So
at that time, was there a lot of movement back and forth between the Runners and the Kings?
So there wasn't. So my senior year, I left college early actually and signed with LA. So I was with LA through the playoffs the year before.
Okay.
So I had spent some time up there, and we ended up, I think, losing to Edmonton. So I was up there, got to meet a lot of the guys. So that was really neat for a guy coming out of college to be able to do that. But to your point, at that time, it was an older league. LA was an older team, and there was not a lot of movement. We had some good players in LA in the 3 years I was there, and in Phoenix, there wasn't a lot of movement for guys like Sean White. I know Whitey, who was a great player, got some games up, and Sean McCosh, who was a great player, got some games up. They're all local. Chevy. He got some games up, and he was after me. But there wasn't not a lot of movement up and down. They pretty much stuck to their guns. It's different now. I mean, you look now, the young guys, and great for them. I mean, they're getting a lot of opportunity. It's a young man's league. It was different back then. So, the game's changed in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. So, and obviously Mac was an exceptional fighter, or at least fought a lot, was very tough. I specifically remember him fighting Kerry Clark one time. Yeah. For those that don't know, Kerry Clark was the brother of Wendell Clark, who's, at least top 10 all-time tough guy in the NHL, and that might be even doing him a little disservice to say top 10. But I remember he fought Kerry Clark one time, and it was a line brawl. And again, you remember things in your mind from when you're little, and you turn them into these mystical or mythical stories. But I think it was that Mac had at one point started bouncing Kerry's head off the ice. And I again, in my mind, I remember seeing it, but I don't know if I made that up.
Probably saw it. And Kerry Clark played for Salt Lake at that time. And like, we used to joke, Sean McCosh and I, anytime we'd go into Salt Lake, like we'd call it the Salt Lake flu. Like, they were arguably the toughest team, 6, 7, 8 guys that were just heavyweights. And you just knew you were going to get cross-checked in the face. I mean, it was a miserable place to play if you're right.
When I played in the North American League, that was like that in Fernie, BC. The Fernie Ghost Riders, their rink was not regulation size. It was small. Yeah. And all the glass was 4-sheet glass. And they sold actual bottled beer. You know
what small means? No place to hide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for me, I didn't mind it. I had slow feet, less room to chase guys around, and easier to get in a confrontation. But was Kerry the one that when he got done fighting and got tossed, or end of the period got tossed, that he would go off with the one leg up and give her
I think it was him. The one leg up and do the circle spin, right?
And he had the Fu Manchu always rocking, right? Which Wendell had also.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
He could play too. He could get around the ice.
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah. Then there's even now there's not as many tough guys in the league, but the tough guys can generally play. Your Tom Wilsons, even Revo contributes. Now Revo's not nearly as good as Tom Wilson, but it's a whole nother element where it used to be you could make it to a certain level and never have to touch the puck,
right?
I.e., me.
Yeah.
And make it as far as you, but I mean, glassing out red and deep, don't get scored on, and do what you got to do. So bounce around the I, the A. You had a couple years in Europe.
Yeah.
What was that like?
That was pretty neat. Probably after year 6, you almost see the writing on the wall where you're like, okay, this NHL thing might be over. Like, and a lot of guys at that time were going over to Europe. And they paid you really well to go over there at that time. So I was fortunate enough, I ended up playing in Slovenia. The capital is Ljubljana, depending on how you say it. And that was a great league. It was our team at that time. We had 4 imports only on that time, but that league was Northern Italy, Milan Bolzano, all of Austria, and then there were 3 Slovenian league teams. It was called the Alpine League, and it was very good hockey. I remember Mike Krishilneski, Mike DeAngelis was in Milan at that time. I mean, there were really good players that played in that league. So that was neat. But Slovenia, Ljubljana was a great town. A little different. It was neat because everybody there pretty much spoke English.
Okay, makes it easy.
But it was different. It was 10 years after the war. Grocery store, old ladies with the grocery carts, they're just bumping into you, get cut in front of you. You had no say. I mean, my apartment, my phone, if my neighbor apartment was on the phone, I couldn't be on it, right? Like, so we shared a phone. I might have had 2 TV channels. I mean, you have to think about this was 90, this would have been 96, 97, something like that. And I mean, the internet was pretty new, right? Like, so, it's a lot. It would be over there now. It's like so much easier. You get, whatever you get, all the TV you want, the internet. I remember like having the internet, and somebody would send you something, and you remember the old the picture would come up, and it'd take about
45 minutes.
Yeah, it'd take about 2 minutes. So, but it was neat. It was a great experience. Next year, I ended up in Germany, which was great. We had at that time in the DEL, which was the top league in Germany. Most of our team were all North American, all Canadians or Americans. You'd have some Swiss guys or Austrians, but still talk to those guys a lot. But just, got to travel Spain, Portugal. You basically just get on a train and go around and see Europe. So really fond memories of Europe. Yeah.
At that time when North American guys went over, was it, again, you kind of touched on it, writing on the wall, like we know that the show might be out of reach, so let's get some life experience, make some good dough, and wrap it up? Because I know today, obviously, that still happens. We've got some guys that jump over there early and progress there, i.e. Austin Matthews, who broke the rules on how to do things and did things completely different. But you guys go over there now, come back to the A, and then all of a sudden have a sniff at the show again. What was it like then for most of those guys that went over?
Yeah, so you would have... the thing about Europe is there's different levels, right? Just like there is here. So if you went over and you wanted to get paid good money, you had to play in the top league in each country. Finland, Sweden, Austria, Germany, it didn't matter. You go over there and basically, get a car, have an apartment, not make any money. You could do that any time. But most of the guys, when they left at that time, either had been guys who... and I use Mike DeAngelis just as an example, just because he never played pro hockey, but was easily good enough to play pro hockey. But he played hockey in Europe, made the decision right after college to go to Europe. He had an Italian passport, so he lived in Italy for many years. I mean, he played in multiple Olympics, world championships. There were guys that did that just went over, never just said the heck with the pro game over here. And then there were guys, when you got to the end of your career, I think of Mike Krushelniski, who was a great player in Detroit for many years. They would then go over there and just play maybe 1 or 2 more years. Or there were guys that were towards the middle of their career that just said, hey, I can battle in the minors, 84 games a year and just get the crap beat out of me, right, on the small ice and travel from city to city on bus. Or I can go to Europe, have a car, have an apartment, have a place to eat, and they're going to pay me
a little more rock star.
And I'm going to play.
Right?
Yeah, I'm going to play 30 games. It's way better on my body. And at that time, there were sometimes they'd pay you cash. I mean, it's crazy different things how they did the money thing back then, right?
Sure. So explain your transition. Then you retire. You put that high end Harvard degree to use and transfer into professional life. How does that transition happen and start for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I decided to retire in '99, I had a few other options of going back to Europe. But I remember that year, it was our 10-year anniversary of the national championship. So we had a get together with that group back in Boston. And I remember going back to our reunion, and we had a big weekend, and it was just a fun event, and I remember sitting around the table with all my teammates, and a couple of them were still playing hockey. Most of them were out of the game. I think the only one still playing hockey at that time from that group was Teddy Donato. Most of them, and Peter Savaglia, my 2 line mates. But most of them were doing what they do. What they were supposed to do. They went to Harvard Business School, they were running hedge funds, just killing it, right? And I'm just like, boy, what am I going to do, right? Am I going to go back to Europe and, make my 70,000? And I remember asking all of them, I'm like, I'm going to retire. What do you think? What do you think I should do? I had no idea. I knew I was going to do something with money, finance, because that's what interests me. Great group of guys. They're like, go home, think about it, come back here, spend a couple days with each of us and see what you like. One of the guys before I went home who I'd played with was a group vice president at that time with American Express Financial Advisors. Okay. And he said, hey, Mike, just go talk to this guy when you get back. Just talk to him, Anyways, long story short, I go back, show up for an interview. And I think they're hiring anybody that's breathing right now. And they're just like, okay, go take your tests. And that's what I did. And that was in 1999. And it's been 22 years later, and I'm still with the same company, have my own franchise, and it's just funny how things work out. But yeah, So
when did you break off and get your own franchise with the same company?
So the way they did it back then is they hired you as an employee, and with if you did well enough after year one, you were able to bump out and actually open up your own office. So basically all it meant was, instead of going to this office and then paying for everything, I get to go pick my own office and I get to pay for everything, right? But, you know, your payout's higher, you make more money, right? And you're more independent, that type of thing. So that's what I did. And yeah, I've been lucky. It's worked out. It was a grind. It was hard. I mean, there were 12, 14-hour days. My wife and I were both working. I think my first salary, just so you know, when I bumped out of hockey, was I had an $18,000 forgivable draw. That's what I got, right? And if I didn't make that, then I owed the company, right? And our Mason, my 25-year-old at that time, he was just born, and he was always sick as a kid, right? And so it was just like, we just look at each other and go, all right, who's getting fired first? Who wants to not go to work today, right?
Yep.
So it was tough. It was rough. And even after, you know, a glamorous, semi-glamorous pro career, you come to the real world and it's like, it's a grind. It was a grind, but things have worked out. It wasn't easy, but I'm lucky. I consider myself
it's
lucky.
interesting. People look at the end result and have no idea, you know, how you got there, right? So when I wrapped up, you know, my playing career, which literally not nearly as prestigious as yours, but when my wife and I got engaged, I was an assistant branch manager at a credit union here locally, the largest in the state, in the heart of the recession, salaried at $24,000 a year. No overtime, no sales incentive, nothing else. My wife had just graduated from ASU with her global business management degree from her WP Carey school, and got her first job, because she's in the same line of work as you, got her first job with a big name shop, and was making 34 grand a year. Yeah. And that's when we got engaged, married, had our first kid, was, you know, combined making, you know, just over 60 grand a year. And obviously we've been able to build a pretty good life together and come up through those steps of, I remember our first Christmas together married, she bought me a 60-inch plasma TV that I'm pretty sure she got at Costco for like $1,000. And she had to save all year to buy me that $1,000 television. And I was blown away that she got it for me. Now, granted, when I opened it up, at some point, somebody at Costco had stepped on it. There's a big footprint in the screen, and she was mortified, and I didn't care because I was just still so blown away that, you know, but again, people look at the end result and go, oh, wow, you've done so well, or things are so easy, or whatever the case may be, and don't realize, well, at some point, there was next to no money coming in, and you laid your nuts on the line to try to go, okay, work harder than everybody else, try to be better than everybody else, and build something from nothing to get to an end point of having a little bit of success.
Yeah, and I think the key is, you know, and I try and tell my two boys is hard work is a big thing. Perseverance is a big thing, but I think you need to find something that you enjoy doing. I've been lucky to do two things in my entire life: hockey and I still skate. I mean, I skate 3 nights a week because it's just fun, right? I just like being around the guys. It's just fun, and it's good exercise. But find something you like to do, and it's not easy, right? I mean, and because at the end of the day, I mean, I just even talk to a lot of my clients, and some are very happy with what they do, and some aren't, right? And the happier ones are just happier.
Sure. And they may tend to do better as well, right? You know, when you get up and go to the office every day and you're excited about what the day may bring, not to mean that there's not going to be hurdles or shit that comes up, but at least you have a purpose and you know that you're skilled at it. You know that you're going to deliver for somebody and do something. It makes it a little bit easier to get up and take the day on, as opposed to dreading and be like, oh, I'm doing this again.
And easier to take the night on too, because that's when you do a lot of your thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So how did you, when you started off trying to build a book of business, clients, et cetera, how did you go about that? Did you rely on a lot of relationships you already had and recruit within? I know a lot of like sales coaching platforms, you know, it's your sphere, it's your friends, it's your family that you should be selling to first. How did you go about it?
Yeah. And that's a tough one. But I remember a lot of cold calling. When I started being with American Express Financial Advisors, we had a built-in, I guess you would say, and we were owned by, I guess, American Express. So we had a built-in lead base with American Express employees. So that was great. You could call people who work for American Express, and they wouldn't hang up on you because you were kind of with the same company.
And you're selling it as maybe part of their benefits package. And this is something you have available to you by working here.
And they did actually, right? I mean, they got discounted for financial planning and all that. So that was great. But for me, I had been here long enough where I had a good natural market in Phoenix. I'd been here since '91. My wife is from here, and so I knew a lot of people. And I had some good natural market people who really helped me and helped give me referrals. But it's tough, you're new in the business. You're asking people for money to trust you. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing early on, right? I just knew that, that if I could learn it and do the right thing for people, that hopefully it would work out.
Sure.
And it was tough because in 1999 I started, and if you won't remember this, but in 2000 to like 2002, it was a rough time in the market.
Yep.
I mean, things went south. Same with '08. I mean, you can go, but it was, so it wasn't easy. It was not easy. That's for sure.
Yeah. I still remember the first mortgage I ever wrote, and it was not a plain Jane easy one. It was all kinds of complexities. And I must've done a good job fooling the guy into knowing that I knew what I was doing, because I've done, I think, like 4 or 5 deals for him since. But yeah, it's incredible. You got to go out there and do it. It's funny you mentioned cold calling, because that's, at least in my space now in real estate, both on the realtor side and on the mortgage side, that has become a thing again with what we're encountering in the market. And everybody's saying cold call. All your sales coaching stuff is based around cold calling and social media.
Yeah.
Did you find a lot of success for that? How hard was like your call reluctance and things that you hear about now with people, like they're nervous to pick up the phone and do it?
It's funny. It's hard. It was hard. And we would have what were called phone clinics. So you would just sit for like 4 hours and call people. But the funny thing about it is, to this day, 22 years later, some of my best clients are the people that I did not know who picked up that phone one day and I talked to. They're still in my client base.
Yep.
And great people. And talked to one the other day from 22 years ago. She was an American Express employee, and so really neat. But yeah, it's a grind. It was a grind.
Sure. So, and your wife is, I mean, obviously, so you're self-employed now and owning your own franchise. Your wife's self-employed as well, right? Owns spas.
Yep.
When did that come up, and how did that go? And how does that incorporate with you at all? Are you guys completely different channels in managing your stuff and running your businesses? Give us a little bit on that.
Yeah. So she's been very successful in that area. Probably literally one of the hardest workers I know, is my wife. I mean, I really, and I think that's where she works way harder than me. I think that's where our boys got it from, was from her. But she was in the corporate world, worked at she graduated from ASU also, like your beautiful spouse, got her master's at the University of Phoenix when she was working there, and really was planning on being a social worker.
Okay.
That was not good. She would go out to houses and come home and cry, and it was just, it was tough. So she became an enrollment counselor, was very successful at the University of Phoenix, one of the top enrollment counselors there. And her and I guess her boss at that time, who is now her business partner, decided to do something different. And at that time, what they were going to do was we were going to look at buying a couple franchises for one of the biggest massage places in town, who you may know. So we went down that path, but at the end of the day, they decided to branch off and kind of do their own thing. So they started Fuchsia Spa. They have, I think, 4 locations, 1, 2, 3, 4 locations in town, 1 in Tucson. And a couple of them are franchises, but so that's been 17 years.
Wow.
And so to your point, she does her own thing. I do my own thing. Unless I'm switching out dryers or washers at her place. I'm actually titled head of security.
Oh.
I've had to fire clients at the spa, and then I do maintenance. So,
the glorious
I am
stuff.
involved, but just, not on business decisions.
And that's
which
awesome.
works, by the way, which is great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And that's awesome. And that's, again, I just wanted to bring that up as another example for people. Again, you're heading down one path, corporate America. And again, you get an inkling to do something else and roll the dice and work hard towards it and become successful at it. Now, so you're 22 years in your industry. How long has it been that you actually own your own shop?
21 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So right. I mean, a year in, and then your wife, 17 years.
Yep.
I mean, and that's awesome. So you guys do that, but I know as it incorporates into my world, obviously we've known each other from the hockey world. We've had a chance to work together quite a bit on some real estate stuff. So you've got some long-term rentals, I think, that you've had for quite a while, but just recently got in the last year, got into some short-term rental stuff. What initiated the drive to start adding to your real estate portfolio and then make the switch to short-term rentals, at least with some of your properties here in the last couple of years?
Yeah. So our first endeavor into real estate was back in 2004. That's when we bought, I think at that time, about 5 properties. Still own most of them up to this point, have sold a couple in the last couple of years. But I've always believed, it's funny when you talk to people, it's a lot of them, it's black or white, right? You've got your real estate people that will only do real estate, and that's great. And then you got your people who will do regular, what I call regular conventional investing, stocks, bonds, that types of thing. And they're just not as familiar with real estate, and that's a lot of times why they don't do it. But when I talk to people, I always say I'm all about being diversified. I mean, like, I'm very familiar with both, so it helps. But we got into real estate early and as a long-term plan. Never done any. We flipped one house, which worked out really well in 2008, but never had done that. So we've had these properties for a long time, long-term rentals. Just recently, as of last year, got involved in the short-term rental market, both up north in Flagstaff. It's a great short-term rental market up there, obviously. And we'd never done it before. My wife does most of the education around it. I leave that to her. She's real good at that. She stays up late. She loves to research things. So I'm just like, I'm the, happy wife, happy life, right?
Maintenance guy for those.
Yeah,
too.
maintenance. I'm the maintenance guy for those. So our first one went live in, it took a long time, right? November. It probably took 4 months from the get-go, which is way too long when doing a short-term rental. Recently got a second one, put that time frame on 6 weeks to get it done, and we're right up against that right now. So we're real close, but learned a lot in the first one. But just knew that there's just a lot more money to be made in the short-term rental, right? It's a lot of work if you do it yourself, but you can make it more, right? So like more work usually equals more money in anything you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of how we got into it. And
didn't you go to like a short-term rental conference not that long ago before we got this second one?
Yeah. So education is important. So we had never been to Nashville, and my wife, Lisa, follows a lot of people who are experts in that area. So she identified a conference in Nashville. We'd never been there. Hey, let's go spend 3 days and see Nashville and learn stuff that we don't know, right? And we did. And we learned a ton, right? I mean, we learned a ton.
What were your big takeaways from there, you think? A couple biggest ones?
Well, yeah. So I would say the big thing, a lot of it had to do around financing and cap rates and just really understanding the numbers as far as what things cost, what you can make. A lot of times people just think of like you talk a lot about it, an interest rate is this, oh, it's too high. Well, it may or may not be too high,
sure.
Right? I mean, it's until you put all the numbers together.
Absolutely.
So that was important, just like understanding your numbers and cap rates and what you can make and what you should make, right, to make the numbers work. So that was big. The other big thing, the takeaway for me, which my wife completely gets, she's the decorator. So if you ever see our properties, I mean, they're nice. I mean, they're nice.
Yeah, the one you've had active up there in Flag for a while, the listing pictures are beautiful.
Right. And our feedback has always been from every guest is, this place is so great, the pictures don't do it justice, right? I mean, so that makes you feel good as something you put together. But I think the thing that really separates the top short-term rentals, the top short-term rentals from the bottom ones are decor and what's involved in the house. I mean, there's no question the top properties are the ones that are put together the best, the most modern, have the most amenities. They are going to just do better than everything else. It's just a fact.
Have you guys, and a lot of this I've seen it, and so in my short-term rental up north, I'm not in Flag, I'm in Happy Jack, but is a theme-based to an extent within your property, to where you can name your property and there's a theme correlated to it. Is that something that you guys have played into your properties?
Yeah, I would say so. The first one is an A-frame chalet. If you, and by the way, I learned this. If you talk to the A-frame people, they will tell you I don't have an A-frame because I have a chalet because it doesn't go all the way down. But we call it we call it an A-frame. So that is more right. Like that was, I guess, more woodsy, with definitely a modern twist, right? So something newer. But the new one that we're doing right now is very modern with pinks and blacks. And the big thing that we did with this one to kind of set it apart is I turned the garage into a game room. Epoxy the floor with glow-in-the-dark flakes, black lights everywhere, double TVs, all kinds of games, Pac-Man, you name it.
Very
big movie
cool.
posters that light up, right? So that's different. You don't,
Sure.
Okay, it's one thing to have one game, but it's another thing when they come up there and the kids have this area to hang out in.
Well, then it becomes an
forever.
experience, right?
Exactly. And that's
Within
what
itself.
you want.
That's awesome. You guys plan on getting more, keep growing the short-term rental, or ride the two for a little bit and see how it goes?
Yeah, I feel like right now I feel like it's almost like a sickness, right? Like, I mean, like when you just want more, like you want to do, for me, it's always been, I want to invest more, whether it be in the stock market or in real estate. It's just like, I just want to put more money in because it's fun to see, although doesn't feel like it's growing right now,
Sure.
Right. What does Warren Buffett say, right? Like he buys things, and it's true in the real estate world or in stocks. He doesn't buy probably a piece of real estate or a stock because he thinks it's going to go up or hopes it's going to go up in the next 5 days. He buys it because he thinks that the house or the company is going to be worth more 10 years from now. And that's why you invest, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so it's hard for people to have that mindset, but it's just kind of neat to think about. For me, it's always been about savings. I mean, I can remember when I was in Europe and we would ride on the back of the bus. And I still remember with Jimmy Hiller, Mark Chris, all guys that had played at high levels. And we'd sit in the back of the bus, all intelligent guys. And we just talk, what are we going to do next? Right? Like, what are we going to do when this hockey's done? And we would sit and throw our own ideas. And it was always about saving. And it still is. So I've even lost track about what your question was.
No,
but
it's
like,
good.
yeah. But it's just fun, right? It's
Yeah.
fun.
And it's fun. Yeah, when you enjoy it. And then like this short-term rental, you're learning something new, right? So somebody who's been an expert in your field for X amount of time, had a long runway of long-term rentals, I think you're a guy that gets enjoyment out of learning something new and be like, all right, well, I'm going to dominate this too, or figure out how to do this to perfection.
Right. And to your question, what I just remembered is if the right deal comes along, yeah, we're in. But you have to, have the resources, the numbers have to work. But I'm pretty tagged out right now on just all the work we've done, right? Like,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So we'll wrap this up with kind of touching on the economy. You touched on it there with what's going on. I will rant and rave a little bit, and I'll let you just chime in where you want. So obviously, as it impacts my business right now with the mortgage stuff, and the fear around a housing bubble, et cetera. First off, we have not seen the historic data indicators do not lead us to believe that there is going to be a housing bubble. And a housing bubble would be a 20% decline in values here in the Phoenix metropolitan area. We have seen a reduction in list price on properties for the last few months, which has just become, and for my clients, a great asset in leveraging and negotiating with the seller to get costs paid for, buy down interest rates, pay for appraisals, pay for inspections, et cetera. But there's a lot of fear based around that. And you've got these people on some certain cable news networks that have been beating the drum that there's going to be a housing bubble since 2016. And again, if it's one of those things, you beat a drum long enough, you're eventually going to be right at some point. But if those people would have listened to them in 2016, they wouldn't have seen this arguably unhealthy, very much unsustainable growth that we saw the last 2 years where, I mean, the average property went up 50% in value, through 20 and 21 in Phoenix. So we're not seeing this. So we're seeing that fear-based. But as far as it kind of coincides with what you do, inflation and its impact on the bond market has drove interest rates up dramatically. Yesterday with the CPI report coming in, we saw mortgage-backed securities hit their lowest level of the year. Mortgage rates hit their highest level of the year. We've kind of plateaued throughout the day today. And I think that the Fed is raising the Fed funds rate, which people have a misconception about. They think when the Fed raises the Fed funds rate, that raises mortgage rates, when they have almost a converse effect on each other. But the Fed is raising rates to fight inflation. But then at the same time, we've got the government spending money hand over fist, which is just feeding inflation as well. So I think I am tired of predicting. People constantly ask me to predict. I'm sure they ask you to predict as well. But if we keep doing what we're doing now, as far as the Fed raising rates, it's going to cause more pain for the consumer. And if the government keeps spending money, it's just going to drag out this inflation fight and make it to where it's not going to be solved as quickly as maybe it should. On that, take from that anything you want and add your 2 cents. Obviously, I know that a little bit delicate for you with, giving advice when people aren't your clients, et cetera, but anything to add to that?
No, I think, and you're spot on with all of that, right? I think mortgage rates at all-time highs, right? Like
recent history, last
history,
10 years.
Right? But you're right. If inflation continues to rear its head, which I don't know why it won't, the Fed will continue to raise. So that will go on. But eventually it'll all get worked out. 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 2 years. I don't know. I mean, things always revert back. That's normal. Same with the stock market, right? I mean, so that's just going to happen. I kind of look at it more as a bigger picture, and that, it's like, I think Warren Buffett, I quote Warren Buffett a lot because he's a smart guy, but like when's a good time to buy stocks, right? When you have money. And when's a good time to sell stocks? When you need money, right? That's what he said.
Sure.
So I don't know why real estate's any different. I mean, like right now, and I track the market pretty well in Arizona. But if you're looking for, I just feel like if you're looking for a house, I mean, there's a lot of supply out there right now compared to what there was, right? I remember up north in Flagstaff, I remember looking at the Flagstaff market, there might have been 10 houses that were anything good to buy at one time. Now there's just hundreds and hundreds of them, right? So the supply is there. Somebody might argue and say, well, rates are too high, so no. Either, you know what I mean? Yeah, they're high right now, but like, what's the worst case scenario? If you're looking for a house and you find exactly what you love and what you need, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can get in. Yeah, your payment might be a little bit higher. Either you can afford it or not, which I understand.
Yep.
And the worst case is maybe you end up refinancing when rates come down, which they will, I would imagine, at some point, right? Yep. So, but it's tricky, right? I mean, everybody's in a different situation, and it's hard. And it's tough right now. It's not great out there in the world, right?
Sure.
Portfolios are down, sentiment is down, gas is up, and it's probably not going away anytime soon. So you just gotta battle through it, and I think it always reverts back at some point.
Absolutely, and in mortgage rates, and you touched on it coming down. Mortgage rates follow inflation, so mortgage rates will recover. Like you said, everything they will when inflation recovers. Right. And what's that timetable? I think there was people at the beginning of this year as shit started to get out of hand. We're thinking, well, by the end of the year, it's going to get better. And with the monetary policy we've seen happen, now they're saying, well, maybe middle of next year. I know Fannie Mae and B of A both came out and said that they expect mortgage rates to be around 4.5% beginning or middle of next year, Well, yeah, if you can get into a property now, granted the rate's the highest it's been in 10 years, But if we're staying within the confines of you've got X amount of capital to come to the table with to cover your down payment and closing costs, and your payment, you're comfortable with it being in this area. Again, you might not like it. It might be $800 more than it would have been had you bought this house a year ago. But if those things are comfortable with the supply increase that we've seen going from, 6,000 houses for sale in the Valley in the first quarter of this year to 18,000 for sale now, you've got the options to find the house that you couldn't find before when you were overbidding 50 grand for a house that was a hunk of shit just because you felt like you had to buy a house. Well, now you're not going to do that anymore. You're not going to pay 50 grand over. Unless, guess what? You're probably going to get that seller to pay for your closing costs and maybe giving a little bit extra to buy down your interest rate. And the opportunity to refinance is absolutely going to come. What's been the sentiment from your clients in general? Wide spectrum. I know my wife comes home every day. She goes, I got some guy that said, hey, well, the market went down 1,300. You bought me in, right? Yeah, great. Awesome. Love it. And then the other guy's calling in going, holy shit, the market's down 1,300 today. What are we going to do? Yeah. Are you seeing the full spectrum as well from your client base?
You do. I mean, when you have your aggressive clients and you have your conservative ones and you have your, ones that get a little more rattled in this environment and ones, with most of my clients, they're great. And I've been lucky because they've been through a lot of this, right? And they were through it in, I don't know, was it 18 and 08? I mean, they've been through a lot of these. So they get COVID, right? I mean, COVID, we moved down and came back up. So I always say, stocks only go up and they do over time, right?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, you see the full spec, and for me, it's like you've got to be, part therapist, right? Part educator, part investor. But my clients, and when I talk to them, I love them all, and I'm fortunate in that I get to work with who I want, and it's just I'm lucky like that, and they've all been great, and they know that it's going to flip.
Sure,
I believe they're going to have. I could be wrong, but I just believe they're going to have a lot more money 2 to 3 years from now. I mean, everybody will, right? I mean, but those are, there's things that can happen. There's always something that comes up. Something always comes up.
Yeah, right. You had COVID nobody saw happen, and COVID arguably was a major player in why home values went up the way they did, right? Because the Fed was doing monetary policy to stimulate, which drove mortgage rates down into the high 2s, right? So then all of a sudden, boom, you can go and get that house that you maybe couldn't afford before with a real nice payment. And now we're seeing rates are kind of, quote unquote, they're really normal. They might be the lowest or highest last 10 years, but last 10 years, not a lot of normalcy like you're talking about, from the housing collapse to 18 to the political dynamic, which has completely changed in this country since DJT got involved. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like we're in a whole new world in a lot of aspects where a lot of historical things may or may not predict what they used to. But then there's some other things that, like, water always finds its level. Right?
And I heard like 90%, this, you can tell me if this is true or not, you might know more than me, but I heard a stat the other that 90% of the mortgages that people hold right now are, they were like under 3% or something.
Yeah,
right?
at least in the mid 3s or lower.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very true. Well, all right, Vuk. Well, I appreciate you taking some time today, bud. It was awesome to get to run through the glory days of the hockey and see how that you transitioned that into a successful business career, and then obviously the real estate stuff as well. So I appreciate it.
You are welcome. Anytime.
Done.